Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Deiro Garcia Anaerobic Wash Processed Colombia from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Manhattan, based out of Rotterdam, Netherlands. And I'm sure I know what a lot of you are thinking. Why on earth are you reviewing another anaerobic processed Colombian coffee? And there are actually a number of good reasons, so let me start with this. This coffee does come from the same farm that the Deiro Garcia came from. And that was a coffee I enjoyed so much it ended up on our honorable mentions list last year. But in addition to that, it very much has a flavor profile that sounds like my type of coffee, and it's also a Sidra, which is a variety I've been a pretty big fan of. I've kind of noted that in previous videos. But in addition to that, I've always stated that the anaerobic wash is actually a little different from the anaerobic natural, even the anaerobic or just natural processed coffees, as they tend to not sacrifice a lot of the really strong flavors, while at the same time maintaining at least a little bit more clarity, a lot more cleanliness in the cup of coffee. So as a result, I don't treat them the same as I do other processing methods, and as a result, I'm not as averse to purchasing and trying coffees with this processing method. So we'll go ahead and see if that lived up to the expectation. This right here is day 22 of this coffee. And finishing Manhattan coffee on day 22 is a little early for me, but we started this coffee on day 7, so let me go ahead and go through our recipe real quick, which was our standard Manhattan 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 208 degrees Fahrenheit. Definitely liked this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Manhattan is a European light for the roast profile. And with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 7, first impression, and it immediately reminded me of that Deiro Garcia, which was a very pink cup of coffee in general. It was that dragon fruit flavor note that they had listed on here. But this cup of coffee was that with a more pronounced sense. This was a much more vibrant cup of coffee than that one. The biggest complaint I maybe had about the Deiro Garcia was at times it was a little tame relative to what I expect from Manhattan's coffees. But this one right here definitely didn't have that problem. Right from the onset, really vibrant, reminded me almost of a pink lemonade, and that's going to be a really big theme throughout this video. Quite sweet, pretty positive first impression. Day 9, coffee just as good the second time around, definitely better as it cools down. You can see the listed strawberry, as the cup does have a fair bit of that really strong strawberry sweetness, but it's very much kept at a bearable level. It's not a funky, fermenty, sort of strawberry-like or boozy strawberry-like cup of coffee, and as a result, it's much more clean, much more enjoyable for me, definitely in that sense. Day 11, coffee can feel a little bit grainy at times, which has been consistent with Manhattan's anaerobic coffees, and that's actually been a little bit of a consistent theme with quite a few of Manhattan's coffees actually, is from time to time I will get this very grainy quality that comes from the cup of coffee. A lot of that settles as it does cool down, and as a result you're getting an abundance of pink and red flavors in the cup of coffee. My main goal for this cup of coffee for the most part was to kind of reduce that grainy component that I was getting from the cup of coffee. And on day 13, we continue to see the cup of coffee improve in general as it's increasing slightly in the sweetness with every brew, which is saying something because it was a very sweet cup of coffee right from the onset. Most dominant characteristic still remains the very vibrant pink lemonade-like component to it. Day 15, I felt like the recipe was going to need to be adjusted because I really needed to mitigate that slight graininess that was coming from the cup of coffee, and that was experienced more at the higher temperatures just off of brew. But it felt grainy in both a cereal-like sense as well as in a bready sense. And it's kind of funny going into this, I didn't know what a strawberry frutella was, and I assumed it was some sort of like pastry. And then I looked it up, and it turns out it's a Starburst, and that makes a lot of sense because it does taste like a Starburst when I really think about it. It's got a very sort of strong candy-like taste to it. But the least attractive aspect of this cup was still that graininess that I couldn't help but shake all the way up to this point in this cup of coffee. Day 17 was getting a little concerned as the coffee was starting to feel, well, grainy again, but a bit at a stagnation point, as I wasn't seeing improvement from day 15 to day 17, and was worried that this cup of coffee wasn't going to improve from this sense. We were going to have a grainy forward at the start, warmer temperature cup of coffee, and then it was going to settle down into that very strong, vibrant, sort of tart pink lemonade cup of coffee. But I was wrong because day 19, the coffee had seen its best improvement to that point, and I noted that after just maybe a little bit more rest, the graininess just kind of goes away on its own, which is really nice. Marked improvement in the cup, kept it at the higher temperatures after kind of experimenting it with some lower temperatures to reduce the graininess. A lot of it has fizzled off, and the coffee is taking a very structured, sweet, tart-like cup of coffee in general. Day 20, coffee is extremely vibrant, and the super tart and sweet floral pink lemonade is the best descriptor with a bit of depth, the extremely pronounced cup. I want to emphasize that those flavors just really dominate the cup. There are some slight secondary components to it, including what I would describe as a stone fruit-like jam, a little bit more apricot for me, I'll get into that a little later, and then a super sugary candy in general, kind of that marked Starburst flavor that we had listed earlier. And yeah, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And we have 4 level 5s, so we have to run through those, of course, real quick. Finish, yeah, it's definitely at a level 5. That's to be expected. I've said even with anaerobic washed processed coffees, they still have that very strong flavor profile to them. So I think that one's definitely justified in the sweetness at a level 5. It's a very, very sweet cup of coffee, bordering on that overbearing sense. But at the same time, it definitely doesn't cross that threshold. So I feel like those two are definitely justified there. So keep that in mind. Very, very strong cup of coffee. And then berry and citrus fruit at level 5. So I've been discussing the very strong sort of pink lemonade-like aspects to this cup of coffee. It's very pronounced. Both of those I feel like are very strong and very justified at that level 5 mark. So I don't think I would adjust either of those in any sense. And then we have a couple of level 4s. So let me run through those real quick. And I think the most important one is that cleanliness, because it's always really impressive when any anaerobic coffee does score a level 4 on the cleanliness. It is going to be slightly on the lower side of that level 4, especially considering I marked that graininess a lot throughout this video. But at the same time, I think it's just really it's just really clean in general for what it is, especially. But then the bitterness at level 4, that's the other one I really needed to discuss, as I want to emphasize again, oftentimes when I chart bitterness, it's not the coffee bitterness itself, but rather the flavor itself. And I've mentioned that this was a very tart pink lemonade sort of taste, and it's that very strong lemon taste that's coming from it. It feels pretty bitter at times, so it's a very bitter lemon, and it might be one of the highest scoring bitterness components we've ever had for any coffee. But yeah, I think it's justified there because it's quite strong. And then the acidity level 4 and florals level 4, I've discussed very briefly the florals in this cup of coffee, but they're almost equally as pronounced as some of the other components in it in general. So as a result, pink blossom is the flavor note they have listed on here. Yeah, very much in here, very floral pink lemonade sort of cup of coffee, but I think that that berry and citrus just really dominates it. So you'll see these kind of as a relative scale lower, and that's where I wanted to touch on the stone fruit because they have a ripe peach listed on here. I would never say at any point I was experiencing a lot of ripe peach, but I could definitely see it, especially when you kind of sit back and think as to what else is in this cup of coffee, but you really kind of have to dig given just how strong the flavor profile is at the forefront of it. But for the most part, yeah, I actually quite like the way that the rest of this tasting wheel looks. I don't think that there's anything else worth noting too much on here. It's very heavily skewed in a lot of directions. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Well, I liked it, and here's what I have always said about Manhattan's coffees. They rarely are lacking for flavor, and this one is very strong on the flavor. So it's one of those things where if you like the flavor of this coffee, I mean, you're just going to like the coffee in general, and that's exactly what happened here. I think given that it was a cup of coffee going into it, I had pretty decent expectations for, but a little bit of hesitancy given the processing method. I'd still have to say that it definitely exceeded my expectations in that sense. It's not going to be my favorite Manhattan coffee of the year. It's going to be kind of one of those that I said this was a really solid cup of coffee, just not necessarily my favorite that Manhattan's going to do. And as a result, the type of person I would suggest this coffee to, keep the flavor profile I've mentioned pretty a lot throughout this video in mind. So a very, very strong pink lemonade sort of cup of coffee, because that's what you're going to be getting. And with a little bit of rest, you're going to see it really shine, because by the end, I feel like I got a really good impression of this cup of coffee, and I really liked the way it was towards this day 20 mark, and I feel like that's going to be the best way you can enjoy this cup of coffee. But for the most part, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, or this coffee just in general, love to know your thoughts and impressions of it. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Deiro Garcia Anaerobic Wash Process Colombia from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.